Everybody, this is our first video on trigonometry, and you'll see here that I have a circle on Desmos. So in trigonometry, what we're going to start is we're going to take a unit circle approach to trigonometry. And in order to do that properly, we have to know a little bit about circles, and in particular, what is the unit circle. So if you're playing along at home, which I hope you are, what I would do is go ahead and bring up your own Desmos window and type this in. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. And it will bring up these sliders for you here. And what I would like you to do is drag these sliders around. Right? So grab the slider and you can move it around and it will change your circle in different ways. And so what I would like you to do is think about this. Okay, so think about what these do. And then I would like you to take this red circle and move it so that it has a center right here at the origin. And it goes through this point right here. Okay, so x equals 1, y equals 0. So I'm going to let you do that. See if you can figure that out. All right, so what you should have found is that by moving this slider for h, it moves the circle left and right, and in particular, it moves the center of the circle left and right. So if I have h equal to 0, what we see is the circle is centered right on the y-axis, right, when x equals 0. And so the center of my circle, the x-coordinate here is 0. And similarly, if I move this around, right, so the k is going to give me the y-coordinate for the center of my circle. So h equals 0, k equals 0. We see that now my circle is centered at the origin. And what I would like to do is see if I can get it to go through this point 1. Well, by moving this slider for r, which actually stands for radius, we see that it just adjusts the size of our circle. So what I want to do is see if I can get it to go right through this point here, and that happens when r is 1. Okay, so this right here, this is what we call the unit circle. Right, so it's the circle centered at 0, 0 that has a radius 1. And if I type in when h is 0, so that would just be x, so I'd have x squared. And then when k is 0, I'm just going to have plus y squared. And when r is 1, this is just going to be equal to 1. So we can see that x squared plus y squared equals 1. That gives us the equation of our unit circle. All right. So this is very important to know. X squared plus y squared equals 1. It comes up a lot for us in trigonometry. Okay. So another part about trigonometry is angles. So what you've probably seen is there's two different ways to measure angles. One of them is called radians, and one of them is called degrees. And since we measure things in two different ways, we're going to have to figure out how do I convert from one to the other. And in fact, this is so important that Desmos actually has buttons where you can convert between radians and degrees. So it's a very common mistake that students make where you're measuring an angle in, say, degrees, but your calculator is computing them in radians. So this is something that you always want to keep in mind when you're working with Desmos and angles. What are the units? Are you working in radians or are you working in degrees? And so we're going to think about how do I go between the two of them here. Okay. So let's go over to this new Desmos graph that I call radians visually. All right, so you can find that on our Plato page. So this one's called radians visually. All right, so what we have here, you see that I still have the unit circle. So this is a circle. It has radius 1, and it's centered at 0, 0. And if I'm going to measure an angle, so I'm going to take the slider and move it up, you'll notice that there's an angle here, right? So this little bar right here, this is the angle that we're measuring. And so what you're probably used to and most comfortable with is measuring angles in degrees, okay? So this would be a 60-degree angle. But if you're talking about the circle, if we're thinking about the unit circle, what we can do is we can actually measure this arc right here. So I have an angle, and what I did is I started here on the x-axis and I rotated it up by 60 degrees. So this blue line, what it did is it swept out this piece of the circle, okay? And so I asked myself, well, how long is that green piece? Right? So that green piece right there would tell me the radian measure of the angle. Right? So if I sort of cut this piece out and I straightened it out and I measured it and I asked, how long is that? That's another way to measure this angle. And so it turns out that if I had a 60-degree angle, the length of this green arc that got swept out would have a length of pi over 3. Okay. All right, so where does this come from? How do I know what radians versus degrees and how do I convert between the two? It's important to understand the definition. Okay, so radians is the measure of this angle right here. So what if I went all the way around the circle? Okay, so if I started here and I swept out the entire circle, the question is, well, I know that in a circle we have 360 degrees. And the radian measure is telling me over here, this calculator that I made up, that I should have 2 pi radians. Okay, so why is that? If I started here and I walked all the way around the circle and came back to my starting point, how far would I have walked? Okay, so you may be familiar with this formula. C equals 2 pi r. So what this stands for is the circumference of a circle is equal to 2 times pi times the radius of the circle. So since this is the unit circle, our radius is 1. And so if I were to plug in a 1 for this r here, I would just get the circumference of the unit circle is just 2 pi. Right? So the circumference of this circle right here is 2 pi. Or the distance, if I walked all the way around, is 2 pi. So we would say that this angle that's measured, this whole circle, this whole angle, is 2 pi radians. And we know that that's the same as 360 degrees. Okay, so this is going to be the key. 360 degrees is equal to 2 pi radians. Okay, so this will be the key for us going forward. How do I convert from radians to degrees? Using that conversion factor. 360 degrees is equal to 2 pi radians. All right, so in the next video, we'll come back and we're going to see some examples on converting from radians to degrees and vice versa. See you then.